Hello. Don't mind me. We're just going to hang out a minute while I set some things up. Let me know if the volume is at all screwed up when you get here. Oh, whatever. I guess that will not do. I'm not happy with that. There we go. That'll work. Okay, so that's there. All right. Do. Just gonna hang out on Twitter for a minute. Let people get here. Do. That's interesting. Let's get that up where it belongs. Not a big fan of this boom arm, but I think I found my sound issues. We'll find out, won't we, huh? Hello, doggy. How are you doing tonight, puppers? There will soon be a surprise for everybody. Well, if I tell you it's not a surprise, is it? Of course, there's nobody here, so I could tell you. And nobody would ever know. Unless you rewatch the stream. You know what? If you do rewatch the stream, and you hear me say this, go ahead and leave a comment. Because, damn Joker you got here. I was going to tell people a secret and you showed up. Thanks for stopping in, Joker. How you doing tonight? Just waiting a minute because I don't want to start. Didn't want you to. Aw, I appreciate that. It's okay. The surprise will come soon. I'm trying to decide how I want to unveil it because I will be getting the stuff I need for the surprise in the next few days. So I just have to figure out how I want. Do I just want to drop it on everybody and see if they notice, or do I want to say something and then like make a big production out of it? I don't know. That's the question. All these questions. I'm doing all right. My elbow's tingly for some reason, but I'm having, I think it's carpal tunnels issues. Is that's what it is? Oh, why it's in my left hand is a great question. Read through the story. It's a good story. We're going to have fun with the story. Just want to give people a chance to get here. We'll wait another minute or two and then we'll get into the story. So apparently you can turn your blood into jewelry. No, thank you. Wow. A build up will make the surprise better. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So I should probably start advertising said surprise. Yeah, while waiting for people, I'm kind of scrolling through Twitter and looking at things. And apparently at conventions and shit now, there's ways to turn your blood into jewelry. So I don't know if they're like solidifying it or just filling things with blood or the fuck. Dice, blood dice. $300. Holy shit. I would not pay $300 for someone to make something out of something that came out of me. Who's whining? Sydney. Silly little dog. Yeah, people are odd. I do, though, now that I'm thinking about jewelry again, have to go and get myself sized for a ring. Apparently, Adam Krigler is got some silver and he's offering to make people rings. So. And then there's somebody else who might like my ring size. Eventually. Okay, I think I've given everybody enough time to show up. I'm gonna get my keyboard out of the way because it's just in the way when I'm reading. Get my book. And open the book. Alrighty, guys. Ready to go. Thing I gotta do real quick. Make sure I'm on the right thing so that if people come into the other chats, I can see them. And tonight we are reading The Curse of Yig by H.P. Lovecraft with Zelia Bishop. Zelia Bishop, sorry. I misread that. Before I get too started, quick announcement, not related to the surprise I recently mentioned before, but I am starting up a second channel to put these on after I read. So I will, edit them, maybe correct some of the vocal mistakes and pop them on that other channel. It will be Cthulhucorn Reads Lovecraft will be the name of the channel. I'm also going to start a children's channel for the Aesop's fables and stuff, but that I haven't put together yet. So when I start putting stuff up on the other channel, I will make sure I link it for y'all. And yeah, so was there something else I was going to tell you guys that's not surprise related? Nope. That's it. All right. Let's get into the story. All right. The Curse of Yig. Oh, hold on. Gotta get myself into a better position. There we go. In 1925, I went into Oklahoma looking for snake lore, and I came out with a fear of snakes that will last me the rest of my life. I admit it is foolish, since there are natural explanations for everything I saw and heard, but it masters me nonetheless. If the old story had been all there was to it, I would not have been so badly shaken. My work as an American Indian ethnologist has hardened me to all kinds of extravagant legendary, and I know that simple white people can't beat the redskins at their own game when it comes to fanciful inventions. But I can't forget what I saw with my own eyes at the insane asylum in Guthrie. I called it that asylum because a few of the oldest settlers told me I would find something important there. Neither Indian nor white men would discuss the snake god legends I had come to trace. The oil boom newcomers, of course, knew nothing of such matters, and the red men and old pioneers were plainly frightened when I spoke of them. No more than 6 or 7 people mentioned the asylum, and those who did were careful to talk in whispers. But the whispers said that Dr. McNeil, who could shew me a very terrible relic and tell me all I wanted to know. He would explain why Yig, the half-human father of serpents, is a shunned and feared object in central Oklahoma, and why old settlers shiver at the secret Indian orgies which make the autumn days and nights hideous with the ceaseless beating of tom-toms in lonely places. It was with the scent of a hound on the trail that I went to Guthrie, for I had spent many years collecting data on the evolution of serpent worship among the Indians. I always felt, from well-defined undertones of legends and archaeology, that great Quetzalcoatl, the benign snake god of the Mexicans, had an older and darker prototype, and during recent months I had well-nigh proved it in a series of researches stretching from Guatemala to the Oklahoma plains. But everything was tantalizing and incomplete, for above the border the cult of the snake was hedged about by fear and furtiveness. Now it appeared that a new and copious source of data was about to dawn, and I sought the head of the asylum with an eagerness I did not try to cloak. Dr. McNeil was a small, clean-shaven man of somewhat advanced years, and I saw at once from his speech and manner that he was a scholar of no mean attainments in many branches outside of his profession. Grave and doubtful when I first made known my errand, his face grew thoughtful when he carefully scanned my credentials and the letter of introduction which a kindly old ex-Indian agent had given to me. So, you've been studying the Yig legend, eh? He reflected it how did I miss this word? Sententiously. I know that many of our Oklahoma ethnologists have tried to connect it with Quetzalcoatl, but I don't think any of them have traced the intermediate steps so well. You've done remarkable work for a man as young as you seem to be, and you certainly deserve all the data we can give. I don't suppose old Major Moore or any of the others told you what it is I have here. They don't like to talk about it, and neither do I. It is very tragic and very horrible, but that is all. I refuse to consider it anything supernatural. There's a story about it that I'll tell you after you see it. A devilish, sad story, but one that I won't call magic. It merely shews the potency that belief has over some people. I'll admit there are times when I feel a shiver that's more than physical, but in the daylight, I set all that down to nerves. I'm not a young fellow anymore, alas. To come to the point, the thing I have is what you might call a victim of Yig's curse, a physically living victim. We don't let the bulk of the nurses see it, although most of them know it's here. There are just 2 steady old chaps whom I let feed it and clean out its quarters. Used to be 3, but good old Stevens passed on a few years ago. I suppose I'll have to break in a new group pretty soon, for the thing doesn't seem to age or change much, and we old boys can't last forever. Maybe the ethics of the near future will let us give it a merciful release, but it's hard to tell. Did you see that single ground glass basement window over in the east wing when you came up the drive? That's where it is. I'll take you there myself now. You needn't make any comment. Just look through the movable panel in the door, and thank God the light isn't any stronger. Then I'll tell you the story. or as much as I've been able to piece together. We walked downstairs very quietly and did not talk as we threaded the corridors of the seemingly deserted basement. Dr. McNeil unlocked a gray painted steel door, but it was only a bulkhead leading us further into a further stretch of hallway. At length, he paused before a door marked B116, opened a small observation panel, which he could use only by standing on tiptoe, and pounded several times upon the painted metal, as if to arouse the occupant, whatever it might be. A faint stench came from the aperture as the doctor unclosed it. I fancied his pounding elicited a kind of low, hissing response. Finally, he motioned me to replace him at the peephole, and I did so with a causeless and increasing tremor. The barred ground glass window, close to the earth outside, admitted only a feeble and uncertain pallor. And I had to look into the malodorous den for several seconds before I could see what was crawling and wriggling about on the straw-covered floor, emitting every now and then a weak and vacuous hiss. Then the shadowed outlines began to take shape, and I perceived that the screaming entity bore some remote resemblance to a human form laid flat on its belly. I clenched the door handle for support as I tried to keep from fainting. The moving object was almost of human size and entirely devoid of clothing. It was absolutely hairless, and its tawny-looking back seemed subtly squamous in the dim, ghoulish light. Around the shoulders, it was rather speckled and brownish, and the head was very curiously flat. As it looked up to hiss at me, I saw that the beady little black eyes were damnably anthropoid, and I could not bear to study them long. They had fastened themselves on me with a horrible persistence, so that I closed the panel gaspingly and left the creature to wiggle about unseen in its matted straw and spectral twilight. I must have reeled a bit, for I saw that the doctor was gently holding my arm as he guided me away. I was stuttering over and over again. But for God's sakes, what is that? Dr. McNeil told me the story in his private office as I sprawled opposite of him in an easy chair. The gold and crimson of late afternoon changed to the violet of early dusk, but still I sat awed and motionless. I resented every ring of the telephone and every whir of the buzzer, and I could have cursed the nurses and interns whose knocks now and then summoned the doctor briefly to the outer office. Night came, and I was glad my host switched on all the lights. Scientist though I was, my zeal for research was half forgotten amidst the breathless ecstasies of fright of a small boy, as a small boy might feel when whispered witch tales go the rounds of the chimney corner. Sorry, I need a drink. It seems that Yig, the snake god of the Central Plains tribes, presumably the primal source of the more southerly Quetzalcoatl or Kulkaken, was an odd, half-anthropomorphic devil of highly arbitrary and capricious nature. He was not wholly evil, and was usually quite well disposed towards those who gave proper respect to him and his children, the serpents. But in the autumn, he became abnormally ravenous, and had to be driven away by means of suitable rites. That was why the tom-toms in the Pawnee, Wichita, and Caddo County pounded ceaselessly week in and week out in August, September, and October, and why the medicine man made strange noises with rattles and whistles, curiously like those of the Aztecs and Mayas. Yig's chief trait was a relentless devotion to his children, a devotion so great that the redskin almost feared to protect themselves from the venomous rattlesnakes which thronged the region. Frightful clandestine tales hinted of his vengeance upon mortals who flouted him or wreaked harm upon his wriggling progeny, his chosen method being to turn his victims, after suitable tortures, into a spotted snake. In the old days of the Indian Territory, the doctor went on. In the old days of the Indian Territory, the doctor went on, there was not quite so much secrecy about Yig. The plains tribes, less cautious than the desert nomads in pueblos, talked quite freely of their legends and autumn ceremonies. Sorry, the cat's in my way. There we go. In autumn ceremonies with the first Indian agents, and let considerable of the lore spread out through the neighboring regions of white settlement. The great fear came in the land rush of 89 when some... Do you mind? Is there a switch on this so you can't step on it? I imagine there is, but I don't know where it is. Oh, there it is. There. Sorry, I didn't want my cat to step on the keyboard. And he's being stubborn about it. Okay. The great fear came in the land rush days of 89, when some extraordinary incidents had been rumored, and the rumors sustained by what seemed to be hideously tangible proofs. Indians said that the new white men did not know how to get on with Yig, and afterwards the settlers came to take that theory at face value. Now, no old-timer in the middle Oklahoma, white or red, could be induced to breathe a word about the snake god except in vague hints. Yet, after all, the doctor added with almost needless emphasis, the only true authenticated horror had been a thing of a pitiful tragedy rather than of bewitchment. It was all very material and cruel, even that last phase which had caused so much dispute. Dr. McNeil paused and cleared his throat before getting down to his special story, and I felt a tingling sensation when a theater curtain rises. The thing had begun when Walker Davis and his wife Audrey left Arkansas to settle in the newly opened public lands in the spring of 1889, and the end had come in the country of the Wichitas, north of Wichita River, in what is at present Caddo County. There is a small village called Binger there now, and the railway goes through, but otherwise the place is less changed than other parts of Oklahoma. It is still a section of farms and ranches, quite productive in these days, since the great oil fields do not come very close. Walker and Audrey had come from Franklin County in the Ozarks with a canvas-topped wagon, 2 mules, and an ancient, useless dog called Wolf, and all their household goods. They were typical hill folk, youngish and perhaps a little more ambitious than most, and looked forward to a life of better returns for their hard work than they had in Arkansas. Both were lean, raw-boned specimens, the man tall and sandy and great-eyed, and the woman short and rather dark, with a black straightness of hair suggesting a slight Indian admixture. Potentially shield wall, yes, but that assumes you're not already insane. In general, there was very little distinction about them. But for one thing, their annals might not have differed from those of thousands of other pioneers who flocked into the new country at that time. That thing was Walker's almost epileptic fear of snakes, which some laid to preternatural causes, and some said came from a dark prophecy about his end with which an Indian squaw had tried to scare him when he was small. Whatever the cause, the effect was marked indeed. For despite his strong general courage, the very mention of a snake would cause him to grow faint and pale, while the sight of even a tiny specimen would produce a shock something bordering on a convulsive seizure. The Davises started out early in the year in the hopes of being on their new land for the spring plowing. Travel was slow, for the roads were bad in Arkansas, while in the territory there were great stretches of rolling hills and red sandy barrens without any roads whatever. As the terrain grew flatter, the change from their native mountains depressed them more, perhaps, than they had realized. But they found the people at the Indian agencies very affable, while most of the settled Indians seemed friendly and civil. Now and then they encountered a fellow pioneer with whom crude pleasantries and expressions of amiable rivalry were generally exchanged. Owing to the season, there were not many snakes in evidence, so Walker did not suffer from his special temperamental weakness. In the earlier stages of the journey, too, there were no Indian snake legends to trouble him, for the transplanted tribes from the southeast do not share the wilder beliefs of their western neighbors. As fate would have it, it was a white man at Okmulgee in the Creek country who gave the Davises their first hint of Yig beliefs, a hint which had curiously fascinating effects on Walker and caused him to ask questions very freely after that. Before long, Walker's fascination had developed into a bad case of fright. He took the most extraordinary precautions at each of the nightly camps, always clearing away whatever vegetation he found and avoiding stony places wherever he could. Every clump of stunted bushes and every cleft in the great slab-like rocks seemed to him now to hide malevolent serpents, while every human figure not obviously part of a settlement or immigrant train seemed to him like a potential snake god till nearness had proved the contrary. Fortunately, no troublesome encounters came at this stage to shake his nerves still further. It would fit in really well, wouldn't it? As they approached the Kickapoo country, they found it harder and harder to avoid camping near rocks. Finally, it was no longer possible, and poor Walker was reduced to the puerile expedient of droning some of the rustic anti-snake charms he had learned in his boyhood. 2 or 3 times the snake was really glimpsed, and these slights did not help the sufferer in his efforts to preserve composure. On the 22nd evening of the journey, a savage wind made it imperative, for the sake of the mules, to camp in as sheltered a spot as possible, and Audrey persuaded her husband to take advantage of a cliff which rose uncommonly high above the dried bed of a former tributary of the Canadian River. He did not like the rocky cast of the place, but allowed himself to be overruled this once, leading the animal suddenly towards the protecting slope, which the nature of the ground would not allow the wagon to approach. Audrey, examining the rocks near the wagon, meanwhile, noticed a singular sniffing on the part of their feeble old dog. Seizing a rifle, she followed his lead, and presently thanked her stars that she had forestalled Walker in her discovery. For there, snugly nested in the gap between 2 boulders, was a sight it would have done him no good to see. Visible only as one convoluted expanse, but perhaps comprising as many as 3 or 4 separate units, was a mass of lazy wriggling, which could not be other than a brood of new-born rattlesnakes. Anxious to save Walker from a trying shock, Audrey did not hesitate to act, but took the gun firmly by the barrel and brought the butt down again and again and again upon the writhing objects. Her own sense of loathing was great, but it did not amount to a real fear. Finally, she saw that her task was done and turned to cleanse the improvised bludgeon in the red sand and dry dead grass nearby. She must, she reflected, cover up the nest before Walker got back from tethering the mules. Old Wolf, tottering relic of mixed shepherd and coyote ancestry that he was, had vanished, and she feared he had gone to fetch his master. One moment. Footsteps at that instant proved her fear well-founded. A second more, and Walker had seen everything. Audrey made a move to catch him if he should faint, but he did no more than sway. Then the look of pure fright on his bloodless face turned slowly to something like mingled awe and anger, and he began to upbraid his wife in trembling tones. "God's sake, Aud, but why'd you go and do that for? Ain't you heard all the things they've been telling about this snake devil Yig? You ought to have told me, and we'd have moved on. Don't you know there's a devil god what gets even if you hurts his children? What for do you think the Injuns all dances and beat their drums in the fall about? This land's under a curse, I tell you. Nigh every soul we had talked to since we come in said the same. Yig rules here, and he comes out every fall for to get his victims and turn them into snakes. Why, Aud, they won't none of them Injuns come across that Cajuns kill a snake for love nor money." "God knows what you done to yourself, gal, a stomping out a whole brood of Yig's chillin'. He'll get you, sure, sooner or later, less'n I can buy a charm offen some of the Injun medicine men. He'll get you, Aud, as sure as there's a God in heaven. He'll come out of the night and turn you into a crawling spotted snake." Yes, that was terrible, I know. Thank you. All the rest of the journey, Walker kept up the frightened reproofs and prophecies. They crossed the Canadian near Newcastle and soon afterwards met with the first of the real Plains Indians they had seen, a party of blanketed Wichitas whose leaders talked freely under the spell of the whiskey offered him, and taught poor Walker a long-winded protective charm against Yig in exchange for a quart bottle of the same inspiring fluid. By the end of the week, the chosen site in Wichita country was reached, and the Davises made haste to trace their boundaries and perform the spring plowing before even beginning construction of a cabin. The region was flat, drearily windy, and sparse of natural vegetation, but promised great fertility under cultivation. Occasional outcroppings of granite diversified a soil of decomposed red sandstone, and here and there a great flat rock would stretch along the surface of the ground like a man-made floor. There seemed to be a very few snakes, or possible dens for them, so Audrey at last persuaded Walker to build the one-room cabin over a vast, smooth slab of exposed stone. With such a flooring and a good-sized fireplace, the wettest weather might be defied, though it soon became evident that dampness was no salient quality of the district. Logs were hauled in for the wagon from the nearest belt of woods, many miles towards the Wichita Mountains. Walker built his wide chimney cabin and crude barn with the aid of some of the other settlers, though the nearest one was over a mile away. In turn, he helped his helpers at similar house raisings, so that many ties of friendship sprang up between the new neighbors. There was no town worthy the name nearer than El Reno on the railroad 30 miles or more to the north. And before many weeks had passed, the people of the section had become very cohesive despite the wideness of their scattering. The Indians, a few of whom had begun to settle down on ranches, were for the most part harmless, though somewhat quarrelsome when fired by the liquid stimulation which found its way to them despite all government bans. Of all the neighbors, the Davises found Joe and Sally Compton, who likewise hailed from Arkansas, the most helpful and congenial. Sally is still alive, now known as Grandma Compton, and her son Clyde, then an infant in arms, had become one of the leading men of the state. Sally and Audrey used to visit each other often, for their cabins were only 2 miles apart, and in the long spring and summer afternoons they exchanged many a tale of old Arkansas and many a rumor about the new country. Sally was very sympathetic about Walker's weakness regarding snakes, but perhaps did more to aggravate than cure the parallel nervousness which Audrey was acquiring through his incessant praying and prophesying about the curse of Yig. She was uncommonly full of gruesome snake stories and produced a direfully strong impression with her acknowledged masterpiece, the tale of a man in Scott County who had a cat's ass in his way. How do you manage to sit on the book while I'm reading it? Who had been bitten by a whole horde of rattlers at once, and had swelled so monstrously from poison that his body had finally burst with a pop. Needless to say, Audrey did not repeat this anecdote to her husband, and she implored the Comptons to be aware starting it on the rounds of the countryside. It is to Joe's and Sally's credit that they heeded this plea with the utmost fidelity. Walker did his corn planting early, and in midsummer improved his time by harvesting a fair crop of the native grass of the region. With the help of Joe Compton, he dug a well which gave a moderate supply of very good water, though he planned to seek an artisan later on. He did not run into many serious snake scares, and made his land as inhospitable as possible for wriggling visitors. Every now and then he rode over to the cluster of thatched, conical huts which formed the main village of the Wichitas, and talked long with the old men and shamans about the snake god and how to nullify his wrath. Charms were always ready in exchange for whiskey, but much of the information he got was far from reassuring. Yig was a great god. He was bad medicine. He did not forget things. In the autumn his children were hungry and wild, and Yig was hungry and wild too. All the tribes made medicine against Yig when the corn harvest came. They gave him some corn and danced in proper regalia to the sound of whistles, rattle, and drum. They kept the drums pounding to drive Yig away, and called down the aid of Tiroa, whose children men are, even as the snakes are Yig's children. It was bad that the squaw of Davis killed the children of Yig. Let Davis say the charms many times when the corn harvest comes. Yig is Yig. Yig is a great god. By the time the corn harvest did come, Walker had succeeded in getting his wife into a deplorably jumpy state. His prayers and borrowed incantations came to be a nuisance, and when the autumn rites of the Indians began, there was always a distant wind-borne pounding of tom-toms to lend it an added background of the sinister. It was maddening to have the muffled clatter always stealing over the wide red plain. Why would it never stop, day and night, week on week? It was always going in exhaustless relays, as persistent as the red, dusty winds that carried it. Audrey loathed it more than her husband did, for he saw in it a compensating element of protection. It was with this sense of a mighty, intangible bulwark against evil that he got in his corn crop and prepared the cabin and stable for coming winter. God damn it, cat. Go on. The autumn was abnormally warm, and except for their primitive cookery, the Davises found scant use for their stone fireplace. For the stone fireplace Walker had built with such care. Something in the unnaturalness of the hot dust clouds preyed on the nerves of all the settlers, but most of all on Audrey's and Walker's. A notion of a hovering snake curse and the weird, endless rhythm of the distant Indian drums
found a bad combination, which any added element of the bizarre went far to render utterly unendurable. He may want to read along, but he can't read with his ass, which is what he is putting on the book. And in my way. Notwithstanding this strain, several festive gatherings were held at one or another of the cabins after the crops were reaped, keeping naively alive in modernity those curious rites of the harvest home, which are as old as human agriculture itself. Lafayette Smith, who came from southern Missouri and had a cabin about 3 miles east of the Walkers, was a very passable fiddler, and his tunes did much to make the celebrants forget the monotonous beating of the distant tom-toms. Then Halloween drew near, and the settlers planned another frolic. This time, had they but known it, of a lineage older than even agriculture, the dread witch Sabbath of the primal pre-Aryans, kept alive through the ages in the midnight blackness of secret woods, and still hinting at vague terrors under its latter-day mask of comedy and lightness. Halloween was to fall on a Thursday, and the neighbors agreed to gather for their first revel at the Davises' cabin. It was on that 31st of October that the warm spell broke. The morning was gray and leaden, and by noon the incessant winds had changed from searingness to rawness. People shivered all the more because they were not prepared for the chill, and Walker Davis's old dog Wolf dragged himself wearily indoors to a place beside the hearth. But the distant drums still thumped on, nor were the white citizenry less inclined to pursue their chosen rites. As early as 4 in the afternoon, the wagons began to arrive at the Walker's cabin, and in the evening, after a memorable barbecue, Lafayette Smith's fiddle inspired a fair-sized company to great feats of salutary grotesqueness in the one good-sized but crowded room. The younger folk indulged in the amiable inanities proper to the season, and now and then old Wolf would howl with doleful and spine-tickling ominousness at some especially spectral strain from Lafayette's squeaky violin, a device he had never heard before. Mostly, though, this battered veteran slept through the merriment, for he is well past the age of active interests and lived largely in his dreams. Tom and Jeannie Rigby had brought their collie, Zeke, along, but the canines did not fraternize. Zeke seemed strangely uneasy over something and nosed about curiously all evening. Audrey and Walker made a fine couple on the dance floor, and Grandma Compton still likes to recall her impression of their dancing that night. Their worries seemed forgotten for the nonce, and Walker had shaved and trimmed into a surpassing degree of spruceness. By 10 o'clock, all hands were healthily tired, and the guests began to depart family by family, with many handshakes and bluff assurances of what a fine time everybody had had. Tom and Jeannie thought Zeke's eerie howls as he followed them to their wagons were marks of regret at having to go home, though Audrey said it must be the faraway tom-toms which annoyed him, for the distant thumping was surely ghastly enough after the merriment within. The night was bitterly cold, and for the first time, Walker put a great log in the fireplace and banked it with ashes to keep it smoldering till morning. Old Wolf dragged himself within the ruddy glow and lapsed into his customary coma. Audrey and Walker, too tired to think of charms or curses, tumbled into the rough pine bed and were asleep before the cheap alarm clock on the mantel had ticked out 3 minutes. And from far away, the rhythmic pounding of those hellish tom-toms still pulsed on the chill night wind. Dr. McNeil paused here and removed his glasses, as if a blurring of the objective world might make the reminiscent vision clearer. You'll soon appreciate, he said, that I had a great deal of difficulty in piecing out all that happened after the guests left. There were times, though, at first, when I was able to make a try at it. After a moment of silence, he went on with the tale. Audrey had terrible dreams of Yig, who appeared to her in the guise of Satan, as depicted in cheap engravings she had seen. It was indeed from an absolute ecstasy of nightmare that she started to wake suddenly to find Walker already conscious and sitting up in bed. He seemed to be listening intently to something, and silenced her with a whisper when she began to ask what had roused him. "Hark, Odd," he breathed. "Don't you hear something a-singing and a-buzzing and a-rustling? Do you reckon it's the fall crickets?" Certainly, there was distinctly audible within the cabin such a sound as he had described. Audrey tried to analyze it, and was impressed with some element at once horrible and familiar, which hovered just outside the rim of her memory. And beyond it all, waking a hideous thought, the monotonous beating of the distant tom-toms came incessantly across the black plains on which a cloudy half-moon had set. "Walker, suppose it's the curse of Yig?" She could feel him tremble. "No, gal, I don't reckon he comes that way. He's shaping like a man, except you look at him close. That's what Chief Grey Eagle says. This here's some varmints come in out in the cold. Not crickets, I calculate, but something like 'em. I oughter get up and stomp 'em out before they make much headway or get at the cupboard." He rose and felt for the lantern that hung within easy reach, and rattled the tin matchbox nailed to the wall beside it. Audrey sat up in bed and watched the flare of the match grow into a steady glow of the lantern. Then, as their eyes began to take in the whole of the room, the crude rafters shook with the frenzy of their simultaneous shriek. For the flat, rocky floor, revealed in the newborn illumination, was one seething, brown-speckled mass of wriggling rattlesnakes, slithering towards the fire, and even now turning their loathsome heads to menace the fright blasted lantern bearer. It was only now, for an instant, that Audrey saw the things. The reptiles were of every size, of uncountable numbers, and apparently of several varieties. And even as she looked, 2 or 3 of them reared their heads as if to strike at Walker. She did not faint. It was Walker's crash to the floor that extinguished the lantern and plunged her into blackness. He had not screamed a second time. Fright had paralyzed him, and he fell as if shot by a silent arrow from no mortal's bow. To Audrey, the entire world seemed to whirl about frantically, mingling with the nightmare from which she had started. Voluntary motion of any sort was impossible, for will and the sense of reality had left her. She fell back inertly on her pillow, hoping that she would soon wake. No actual sense of what had happened penetrated her mind for some time. Then, little by little, suspicion that she was really awake began to dawn on her, and she was convulsed with a mounting blend of panic and grief, which made her long to shriek out despite the inhabilitating spell which kept her mute. Walker was gone, and she had not been able to help him. He had died of snakes, just as the old witch woman had predicted when he was a little boy. Poor Wolf had not been able to help either. Probably he had never even awakened from his senile stupor. And now the crawling things must be coming for her, writhing closer and closer every moment in the dark, perhaps even now twining slipperily about the bedposts and oozing up over the coarse woolen blankets. Unconsciously, she crept under the clothes and trembled. It must be the curse of Yig. He had sent his monstrous children on All Hallows Night, and they had taken Walker first. Why was that? Wasn't he innocent enough? Why not come straight for her? Hadn't she killed those little rattlers alone? Then she thought of the curse's form as told by the Indians. She wouldn't be killed, just turned to a spotted snake. Ugh, so she would be like those things she had glimpsed on the floor. Those things which Yig had sent to get her and enroll her among their number. She tried to mumble a charm which Walker had taught her, but found she could not utter a single sound. The noisy ticking of the alarm clock sounded above the maddening beat of the distant tom-toms. The snakes were taking a long time. Did they mean to delay on their purpose to play on her nerves? Every now and then, she thought she felt a steady, insidious pressure on the bedclothes, but each time it turned out only to be the automatic twitchings of her overwrought nerves. The clock ticked on in the dark, and change came slowly over her thoughts. Those snakes couldn't have taken so long. They couldn't be Yig's messengers after all, but just natural rattlers that were nested below the rock and had been drawn there by the fire. They weren't coming for her, perhaps. Perhaps they had set themselves on poor Walker. Where were they now? Gone? Coiled by the fire? Still crawling over the prone corpse of their victim? The clock ticked and the distant drums throbbed on. At the thought of her husband's body lying there in pitch blackness, a thrill of purely physical horror passed over Audrey. The story of Sally Compton's about the man back in Scott County. Oh. That story of Sally Compton's about that man back in Scott County. He, too, had been bitten by a whole bunch of rattlesnakes. And what had happened to him? The poison had rotted the flesh and swelled the whole corpse, and in the end, the bloating thing had burst horribly with a detestable popping sound. Was that what was happening to Walker down there on the rock floor? Instinctively, she felt she had begun to listen for something too terrible even to name herself. The clock ticked on, keeping a kind of mocking, sardonic time with the far-off drumming that the night wind brought. She wished it were a striking clock, so that she would know how long this eldritch vigil must last. She cursed the roughness of fiber that kept her from fainting, and wondering what sort of relief the dawn could bring after all. Perhaps neighbor would pass. No doubt somebody would call. Would they find her still sane? Was she still sane now? Morbidly listening, Audrey all at once became aware of something which she had to verify with every effort of her will before she could believe it, and which, once verified, she did not know whether to welcome or dread. The distant beating of the Indian tom-toms had ceased. They had always maddened her, but had not Walker regarded them as a bulwark against the nameless evil from outside the universe? What were some of those things he had repeated to her in whispers after talking with Grey Eagle and the Wichita medicine man? She did not relish this new and sudden silence after all. There was something sinister about it. The loud ticking clock seemed abnormal in its new loneliness. Capable, at last, of conscious motion, she shook the covers from her face and looked into the darkness towards the window. It must have cleared after the moon set, for she saw the square aperture distinctly against the background of stars. Then, without warning, came that shocking, unutterable sound. Ugh! That dull, putrid pop of cleft skin and escaping poison in the dark. God, Sally's story. That obscene stench and this gnawing, clawing silence. It was too much. The bonds of muteness snapped, and the black night waxed reverberant with Audrey's screams of stark, unbridled frenzy. Consciousness did not pass away with the shock. How merciful if only it had. Amidst the echoes of her shrieking, Audrey still saw the star-sprinkled square of window ahead and heard the doom-boding ticking of that frightful clock. Did she hear another sound? Was that square window still a perfect square? She was in no condition to weigh the evidence of her senses or distinguish between fact and hallucination. No, that window was not a perfect square. Something had encroached on the lower edge. Nor was the ticking of the clock the only sound in the room. There was, beyond dispute, a heavy breathing neither her nor poor Wolf's. Wolf slept very silently, and his waking wheeze was unmistakable. Then Audrey saw against the stars the black demonic silhouette of something anthropoid, the undulant bulk of a gigantic head and shoulders fumbling slowly towards her. Yeah, go away, snake devil, go away, Yig. I didn't mean to kill him. I was feared he'd be scared of him. Don't, Yig, don't. I didn't mean to go for to hurt your chillin'. Don't come nigh me. Don't change me into no spotted snake. But the half-formless head and shoulders only lurched onward towards the bed, very silently. Everything snapped at once inside Audrey's head, and in a second she had turned from a cowering child to a raging madwoman. She knew where the axe was, hung against the wall on those pegs near the lantern. It was within easy reach, and she could find it in the dark. Before she was conscious of anything further, it was in her hands, and she was creeping towards the foot of the bed, towards the monstrous head and shoulders that every moment groped their way nearer. Had there been any light, the look on her face would not have been pleasant to see. Take that, you, and that, and that, and that. She was laughing shrilly now, her cackles mounting higher as she saw the starlight beyond the window was yielding to the dim prophetic pallor of coming dawn. Dr. McNeil wiped the perspiration from his forehead and put on his glasses again. I waited for him to resume, and as he kept silent, I spoke softly. She lived? She was found? Was it ever explained? The doctor cleared his throat. Yes, she lived, in a way, and it was explained. I told you there was no bewitchment, only cruel, pitiful, material horror. Hey, Dave. It was Sally Compton who had made the discovery. She had ridden over to the Davis cabin the next afternoon to talk over the party with Audrey, and had seen no smoke from the chimney. That was queer. It had turned very warm again, yet Audrey was usually cooking something at that hour. The mules were making hungry-sounding noises in the barn, and there was no sign of old Wolf sunning himself in the accustomed spot by the door. Altogether, Sally did not like the look of the place, so was very timid and hesitant as she dismounted and knocked. She got no answer, but waited some time before trying the crude door of split logs. The lock, it appeared, was unfastened, and she slowly pushed her way in. Then, perceiving what was there, she reeled back, gasped, and clung to the jamb to preserve her balance. A terrible odor welled out as she opened the door, but that was not what had stunned her. It was what she had seen, for within that shadowy cabin monstrous things had happened, and 3 shocking objects remained on the floor to awe and baffle the beholder. Near the burned-out fireplace was the great dog, purple decay on the skin left bare by mange and old age, the whole carcass burst by the puffing effect of rattlesnake poison. It must have been bitten by a veritable legion of the reptiles. To the right of the door was the axe-hacked remnant of what had been a man, clad in a nightshirt, with the shattered bulk of a lantern clenched in one hand. He was totally free of any sign of snakebite. Near him lay the ensanguined axe, carelessly discarded. And, wriggling flat on the floor, was a loathsome, vacant-eyed thing that had been a woman, but was now only a mute and mad caricature. And all that this thing could do was to hiss and hiss and hiss. Both the doctor and I were brushing cold drops from our foreheads by this time. He poured something from a flask on his desk, took a nip, and handed another glass to me. I could only suggest tremulously and stupidly. So, Walker had only fainted that first time? The screams roused him, and the axe did the rest? Yes, Dr. Neal's voice was low. But he met his death from snakes just the same. It was his fear working in two ways. It made him faint, and it made him fill his wife with wild stories that caused her to strike out when she thought she saw the snake devil. I thought for a moment. And Audrey, wasn't it queer how the curse of Yig seemed to work itself out on her? I suppose the impression of a hissing snake has been fairly ground into her. Yes, there were lucid spells at first, but they got to be fewer and fewer. Her hair came white at the roots as it grew, and later began to fill out. The skin grew blotchy, and when she died... I interrupted with a start. Died? Then what was that thing downstairs? McNeil spoke gravely. That is what was born to her 3/4 of a year afterwards. There were 3 more of them. 2 were even worse. But this is the only one that lived. And that is the end of the Curse of Yig. That actually took less time than I thought it would. The next story in the book is the Dunwich Horror, but that one comes in chapters, so we're not going to be doing that tonight. So let me jump forward a little and see if there's a shorter one after it. And then we'll do another story. Hopefully with words I can read. Because I will definitely be reading through the Dunwich Horror. Well, now I'm insane. Thanks a lot. Well, that's what you came for, isn't it? You wanted to be insane. Why else would you come here? Yeah, the Dunwich Horde is definitely... That might even be a couple nights. While I flip through and look for another story, I was thinking about the rest of the year reading some Christmas stories. How do you guys feel about that? Would you like some Christmas cheer? I am Goku. I'm insane from Earth. That next one's really long. Have I played Fallout 4? I have not played Fallout 4. I'm going to be entirely honest. The only Fallout I played was Fallout New Vegas, and I didn't play that much of it. Will the Christmas stories make you insane? Potentially. Holy shit, this one's also really long. I'm going to have some long ones to do. That's going to be fun. God, that one's really long. The mound is also long. You benched 2 sets of 160 pounds for 6 reps. Congratulations. That is awesome. Out the Mountains of Madness is also really... Jesus Christ. Did they put all the long ones at the back? Yep, looks like they did. Okay. It's your body weight. Damn. You benched your body weight. That is awesome. Wish I could bench my bottom weight. Of course, if I could bench my body weight, that'd be pretty freaking impressive, not gonna lie. Yeah, I would be like monster. That one's 50 something, 40 something. Damn. I may be out of I may be out of Lovecraft for the night, guys. Crap. But still, congrats, Dave. That is amazing. I am so happy for you. How long is this one? Oh, I might do this one. It's not that long. Hopefully there are no fancy words in it so that I don't get all stuttery and shit. Okay. This is The Man of Stone with Hazel Heald. Is that considered, oh shit, what's the word? Basically, if you want me to read it, it has to be, public domain. That's the word. Because if it's not public domain, I'm not allowed to. Those old weird tale stories are pretty good and short too, since they were printed in a magazine. Yeah, I will find us some more, yeah. In order to be able to read it on YouTube like this, it has to be, public domain, or else I have to find a way to give them, to have them give me, for them to give me permission to do it. And that usually involves money. And I do not have the money. But I will find some other, I'm sure there's some more other scary stories that I can read. How far back do you have to go to be public domain? That depends on a number of factors, actually. I think, is it 100 years? Why did I do that? I can't Google right now because my keyboard's shut off. You need 6 monies for the license? Yeah. But I think it's anything over 100 years is for sure. And then other things, it kind of depends on how they've handled the property. So, like, yeah, I mean, it depends a lot. I could probably start going on to Reddit and reading some of their stories, but do I really want to do that? Does anybody want me to do that? I'm thinking no. But if I'm wrong, let me know. But for now, this story's not too long. I can read it before we call it a night. It's called The Man of Stone with Hazel Heald. Ben Hayden was always a stubborn chap, and once he had heard about those strange statues in the upper Adirondacks, nothing could keep him from going to see them. I had been his closest acquaintance for years, and our Damon and Pythias friendship made us inseparable at all times. So when Ben firmly decided to go, well, I had to trot along too, just like a faithful collie. Jack, he said, you know Henry Jackson, who was up in a shack beyond Lake Placid for that beautiful beastly spot in his lung? Well, he came back the other day nearly cured, but had a lot to say about some devilish queer conditions up there. He ran into the business all of a sudden and can't be sure it's anything more than a case of bizarre sculpture. But just the same, his uneasy impression sticks. It seems he was out hunting one day and came across the cave with what looked like a dog just in front of it. Just as he was expecting the dog to go to bark, he looked again and saw the thing wasn't alive at all. It was a stone dog. Such a perfect image, down to the smallest whisker, that he couldn't decide whether it was a supernaturally clever statue or a petrified animal. He was almost afraid to touch it, but when he did, he realized it was surely made of stone. After a while, he nerved himself up to go into the cave, and there he got a still bigger jolt. Only a little way in, there was another stone figure, or what looked like it, but this time it was a man's. It lay on the floor, on its side, wore clothes, and had a peculiar smile on its face. This time, Henry didn't stop to do any touching, but beat it straight for the village. Mountaintop, you know. Of course, he asked questions, but they did not get him very far. He found out he was on a ticklish subject, for the natives only shook their head, crossed their fingers, and muttered something about a mad Dan, whoever he was. It was too much for Jackson, so he came home weeks ahead of his planned time. He told me all about it because he knows how fond I am of strange things. And oddly enough, I was able to fish up a recollection that dovetailed pretty neatly with his yarn. Do you remember Arthur Wheeler, the sculptor, who was such a realist that people began calling him nothing but a solid photographer? I think you knew him slightly. Well, as a matter of fact, he ended up in that part of the Adirondacks. Spent a lot of time there, and then dropped out of sight. Never heard from him again. Now, if stone statues that look like men and dogs are turning up around there, it looks to me as if they might be his work, no matter what the rustics say or refuse to say about them. Of course, a fellow with Jackson's nerves might easily get flighty and disturbed over things like that, but I'd have done a lot of examining before running away. In fact, Jack, I'm going up there now to look things over, and you're coming along with me. It would mean a lot to find Wheeler, or any of his work. Anyhow, the mountain air will brace us both up. So less than a week later, after a long train ride and a jolting bus trip through breathlessly exquisite scenery, we arrived at Mountaintop in the late golden sunlight of a June evening. The village comprised of only a few small houses, a hotel, the general store at which our bus drew up. But we knew the latter would probably prove a focus for such information. Surely enough, the usual group of idlers was gathered around the steps, and when we represented ourselves as health seekers in search of lodgings, they had many recommendations to offer. Though we had not planned to do any investigating till the next day, Ben could not resist venturing some vague, cautious questions when he noticed the senile garrulousness of one of the ill-clad loafers. He felt, from Jackson's previous experience, that it would be useless to begin with references to the queer statues, but decided to mention Wheeler as one whom we had known, and in whose fate we consequently had a right to be interested. The crowd seemed uneasy when Sam stopped his whittling and started talking, but they had slight occasion for alarm, for even this barefoot old mountain decadent tightened up when he heard Wheeler's name, and only with difficulty could Ben get anything coherent out of him. Wheeler? He had finally wheezed. Oh yeah, that fella, as was all the time blasting rocks and cutting them up into statues. You knew him, hey? Well, there ain't much we can tell you, and maybe that's too much. He stayed out to Mad Dad's cabin in the hills, but not so very long. Got so he wasn't wanting no more. By Dan, that is. Kinder, soft-smokin', got round Dan's wife till the old devil took notice. Pretty sweet on her, I guess. But he took the trail sudden, and nobody's seen hide nor hair of him since. Dan must have told him something pretty plain. Bad feller to get agin ye. Dan is. Better keep away from thar, boys, for they ain't no good in that part of the hills. Dan's been working up worse and worse mood, and ain't seen about no more, nor his wife neither. Guess he's penned her up so no one else can make eyes at her. Awesome, dragons, thank you. As Sam resumed his whittling after a few more observations, Ben and I exchanged glances. Here, surely, was a new lead which deserved intensive following up. Thank you, Shield Wall. You're just everywhere. Deciding to lodge at the hotel, we settled ourselves as quickly as possible, planning for a plunge into the wild, hilly country on the next day. Need a drink. At sunrise, we made our start, each bearing a knapsack laden with provisions and such tools as we thought we might need. The day before us had an almost stimulating air of invitation, through which only a faint undercurrent of the sinister ran. Our rough mountain road quickly became steep and winding, so that before long our feet ached considerably. After 2 miles, we left the road, crossing a stone wall on our right near a great elm and striking off diagonally toward a steeper slope according to the chart and direction which Jackson had prepared for us. It was rough and briefly traveled. Oh, and dreary traveled, whatever that word is. But we knew that the cave could not be far off. In the end, we came upon the aperture quite suddenly, a black bush grown crevice where the ground shot abruptly upward, and beside it, near a shallow rock pool, a small, still figure stood rigid, as if rivaling its own uncanny petrification. It was a gray dog, or a dog statue. As our simultaneous gasp died away, we scarcely knew what to think. Jackson had exaggerated nothing, and we could not believe that any sculptor's hand had succeeded in producing such perfection. Every hair of the animal's magnificent coat seemed distinct, and those on the back were bristled up as if some unknown thing had taken him unaware. Ben, at last half kindly touching the delicate stone fur, gave vent to an exclamation. "Good God, Jack! But this can't be any statue. Look at it. All the little details, and the way the hair lies. None of Wheeler's technique here. This is a real dog, though heaven only knows how he ever got in this state. Just like stone. Feel for yourself. Do you suppose there's any strange gas that sometimes comes out of the cave and does this to animal life? We ought to have looked more into local legend. And if this is a real dog, or was a real dog, then that man inside must be the real thing too." It was with a good deal of genuine solemnity, almost dread, that we finally crawled on hands and knees through the cave mouth, Ben leading. The narrowness looked hardly 3 feet, after which the grotto expanded in every direction to form a damp, twilight chamber floored with rubble and detritus. For a time, we could make out very little, but as we rose to our feet and strained our eyes, we began slowly to descry a recumbent figure amidst the greater darkness ahead. Ben fumbled with his flashlight, but hesitated for a moment before turning it on the prostrate figure. We had little doubt that the stony thing was what had once been a man, and something in the thought unnerved us both. When Ben at last sent forth the electric beam, we saw that the object lay on his side, back towards us. It was clearly of the same material as the dog outside, but was dressed in the moldering, unpetrified remains of rough sport clothing. Braced as we were for shock, we approached quite calmly to examine the thing, Ben going around to the other side to glimpse the averted face. Neither could possibly have been prepared for what Ben saw when he flashed the light on those stony features. His cry was wholly excusable, but I could not help echoing it as I leaped to his side and shared the sight. Yet it was nothing hideous or intrinsically terrifying. It was merely a matter of recognition. Beyond the least shadow of a doubt, this chilly rock figure, with its half-frightened, half-bitter expression, had at one time been our old acquaintance, Arthur Wheeler. Some instinct set us staggering and crawling out of the cave and down the tangled slope to a point whence we could not see the ominous stone dog. We hardly knew what to think, for our brains were churning with conjectures and apprehensions. Ben, who had known Wheeler well, was especially upset and seemed to be piecing together some threads I had overlooked. Again and again, as we paused on the green slope, he repeated, "Poor Arthur, poor Arthur." But not till he muttered the name, Mad Dan, did I recall the trouble into which, according to old Sam Poole, Wheeler had run just before his disappearance. Mad Dan, Ben implied, would doubtless be glad to see what had happened. For a moment it flashed over us both that the jealous host might have been responsible for the sculptor's presence in this evil cave, but the thought went just as quick as it came. The thing that puzzled us most was to account for the phenomenon itself. What gaseous emanation or mineral vapor could have wrought this change in so relatively short a time was utterly beyond us. Normal petrification, as we know, is a slow chemical replacement process requiring vast ages for completion. Yet here were two stone images which had been living things, or at least Wheeler had, only a few weeks before. Conjecture was useless. Clearly, nothing remained but to notify the authorities and let them guess what they might. Yet, at the back of Ben's head was that notion about Mad Dan still persisted. Anyhow, we clawed our way back to the road, but Ben did not turn towards the village, but looking along upward toward where old Sam had said Dan's cabin lay. It was the second house from the village. The ancient loafer had wheezed. It was the second house from the village, the ancient loafer had wheezed, and it lay on the left far back from the road in a thick copse of scrub oaks. Before I knew it, Ben was dragging me up the sandy highway past a dingy farmstead and into a region of increasing wildness. Yeah, it's definitely, when you're reading it, sometimes it's a challenge because the words definitely aren't where you expect them to be. It did not occur to me to protest, but I felt a certain sense of mounting menace as the familiar marks of agriculture and civilization grew fewer and fewer. At last, the beginning of a narrow, neglected path opened up on our left, while the peaked roof of a squalid, unpainted building shewed itself beyond a sickly growth of half-dead trees. This, I knew, must be Mad Dan's cabin, and I wondered that Wheeler had ever chosen so unprepossessing a place for his headquarters. I dreaded to walk up that weedy, uninviting path, but could not lag behind when Ben strode determinedly along and began a vigorous rapping at the rickety, musty-smelling door. There was no response to the knock, and something in its echoes sent a series of shivers through one. Ben, however, was quite unperturbed, and at once began to circle the house in quest of unlocked windows. The third he tried, in the rear of the dismal cabin, proved capable of opening, and after a boost and a vigorous spring, he was safely inside and helping me after him. "Take care, Dave. Don't have too much fun at work." The room in which we landed was full of limestone and granite blocks, chiseling tools and clay models, and we realized at once it was Wheeler's erstwhile studio. So far, we had not met with any signs of life, but over everything hovered a damnably ominous, dusty odor. On our left was an open door evidently leading to a kitchen on the chimney side of the house, and through this Ben started, intent on finding anything he could concerning his friend's last habitat. He was considerably ahead of me when he crossed the threshold, so that I could not see at first what brought him up so short, and wrung a low cry of horror from his lips. In another moment, though, I did see, and repeated his cry as instinctively as I had done in the cave. For here in this cabin, far from any subterranean depths which could breed strange gases and work strange mutations, were two stony figures, which I knew at once were no product of Arthur Wheeler's chisel. In a rude armchair before the fireplace, bound in a position by the lash of a rawhide whip, was the form of a man, unkempt, elderly, and with a look of fathomless horror on its evil, petrified face. On the floor beside it lay a woman's figure, graceful, and with a face betokening considerable youth and beauty, its expression to be one of sardonic satisfaction, and near its outflung right hand was a large tin pail, somewhat stained on the inside with a darkish sediment. We made no move to approach those inexplicably petrified bodies, nor did we exchange any but the simplest conjectures. That this stony couple had been Mad Dan and his wife we could not well doubt, but how to account for their present condition was another matter. We looked horrifiedly around, and we saw the suddenness with which the final development must have come, for everything about us seemed, despite a heavy coating of dust, to have been left in the midst of a commonplace household activities. The only exception to this rule of casualness was on the kitchen table, in whose cleared center, as if to attract attention, lay a thin, battered, blank book weighed down by a sizable tin funnel. Crossing to read this thing, Ben saw that it was a kind of diary, or a set of dated entries, written in a somewhat cramped, none too practiced hand. The very first words riveted my attention, and before 10 seconds had elapsed, he was breathlessly devouring the halting text. I avidly followed as I peered over his shoulder. As we read on, moving as we did so to the less loathsome atmosphere of the adjoining room, many obscure things became terribly clear to us, and we trembled with a mixture of complex emotions. This is what we read, and what the coroner read later on. The public had seen a highly twisted and sensationalized version in the cheap newspaper, but not even that was more than a fraction of the genuine terror which the simple original held for us as we puzzled it out, alone in that musty cabin among the wild hills, with two monstrous stone abnormalities lurking in the death-like silence in the next room. When he had finished, Ben pocketed the book with a gesture of half repulsion, and his first words were, "Let's get out of here." Silently and nervously, we stumbled to the front of the house, unlocked the door, and began the long tramp back to the village. There were many statements to make and questions to answer in the days that followed. I do not think that either Ben or I can ever shake off the effects of the whole harrowing experience. Neither can some of the local authorities and city reporters who flocked around, even though they burned a certain book and many papers found in the attic boxes and destroyed considerable apparatus in the deepest part of that sinister hillside cave. But here is the text itself. A moment. November 5th. My name is Daniel Morris. Around here they call me Mad Dan, because I believe in powers that nobody else believes in nowadays. When I go up on Thunder Hill to keep the Feast of the Foxes, they think I am crazy. All except the back country folk that are afraid of me. They try to stop me from sacrificing the black goat at Hallows Eve, and always prevent my doing the great rite that would open the gate. They ought to know better, for they know I am Van Karen on my mother's side, and anybody this side of the Hudson can tell what the Van Karens have handed down. We came from Nicholas Van Karen, the wizard, who was hanged in Whitgart in 1587, and everybody knows he had made a bargain with the black men. The soldiers never got his Book of Eben when they burned his house, and grandson, William Van Karen, brought it over when he came to Rensselaerwyck and later crossed the river to Esopus. Ask anybody in Kingston or Hurley about what the William Van Karen line could do to people that got in their way. Also, ask them if my uncle Hendrik didn't manage to keep hold of the Book of Ebon when they ran him out of town and he went up the river to this place with his family. I am writing this, and I am going to keep writing this, because I want people to know the truth after I'm gone. Also, I am afraid I shall really go mad if I don't set things down in plain black and white. Everything is going against me, and if it keeps up, I shall have to use the secrets in the book and call in certain powers. 3 months ago, that sculptor, Arthur Wheeler, came to Mountaintop, and they sent him up to me because I am the only man in the place who knows anything except farming, hunting, and fleecing summer boarders. The fellow seemed to be interested in what I had to say and made a deal to stop here for $13 a week with meals. I gave him the back room beside the kitchen for his lumps of stone and chiseling, and arranged with Nate William to tend to his rock blasting and haul his big pieces with a drag and yoke of oxen. That was 3 months ago. Now I know why that cursed son of hell took so quick to the place. It wasn't my talk at all, but it was the looks of my wife Rose. That is Osborne Chandler's oldest girl. She is 16 years younger than I am, and is always casting sheep's eyes at the fellows in town. But we always managed to get along fine enough until that dirty rat shoot up, even if she did balk at helping me with the rites on Roodmas and Hallowsmas. I can see now that Wheeler is working on her feelings and getting her so fond of him that she hardly looks at me, and I suppose he'll try to elope with her sooner or later. But he works slow, like all sly, polished dogs, and I've got plenty of time to think up what to do about it. They don't either of them know I suspect anything, but before long they'll both realize it doesn't pay to break up a Van Karen's home. I promise them plenty of novelty in what I'll do. November 25th. Thanksgiving Day. That's a pretty good joke. But at that, I'll have something to be thankful for when I finish what I've started. No question but that Wheeler is trying to steal my wife. For the time being, though, I'll let him keep on being a star boarder. Got the Book of Eben down from Uncle Hendrik's old trunk in the attic last week, and I'm looking up something good which won't require sacrifices that I can't make around here. I want something that'll finish those two sneaking traitors, but at the same time get me into no trouble. If it has a twist of drama in it, so much the better. Thought of calling in the emanation of Yoth, but that needs a child's blood, and I must be careful about the neighbors. The green decoy looks promising, but that would be a bit unpleasant for me as well as for them. I don't like certain sights and smells. Day 10. Eureka! I've got the very thing at last. Revenge is sweet, and this is the perfect climax. Wheeler, the sculptor, this is too good. Yes, indeed, that damned sneak is going to produce a statue that will sell quicker than any of the things he's been carving these past weeks. A realist, huh? Well, the new statuary won't lack any realism. I found the formula in a manuscript insert opposite page 679 of the book. From the handwriting, I judge it was put there by my great-grandfather, Barot Picaresset Van Karen, The one who disappeared from New Paltz in 1839. Yao Shub-Niggurath, the goat with 1,000 young. To be plain, I found a way to turn those two wretched rats into stone statues. It's absurdly simple, and really depends more on plain chemistry than outer powers. If I can get a hold of the right stuff, I can brew a drink that'll pass for homemade wine, and one swig ought to finish any ordinary being short of an elephant. What it amounts to is a kind of petrification infinitely speeded up. Shoots the whole system full of calcium and barium salts, and replaces living cells with mineral matter so fast that nothing can stop it. It must have been one of those things great-grandfather got on the great Sabbath on Sugarloaf in the Catskills. Queer things used to go on there. Seems to me I heard of a man in New Paltz, Squire Hasbrouck, turned to stone or something like that in 1834. He was an enemy of the Van Carens. First thing I must do is order the 5 chemicals I need from Albany and Montreal. Plenty of time later to experiment. When everything is over, I'll round up all the statues and sell them as real as work to pay for his overdue board bill. He always was a realist and an egoist. Wouldn't it be natural for him to make a self-portrait in stone and to use my wife for another model, as indeed he's been doing for the past fortnight? Trust the dull public not to ask what quarry the queer stone came from. December 25th, Christmas. Peace on earth and so forth. Those two swine are goggling at each other as if I didn't exist. They must think I'm deaf, dumb, and blind. Well, the barium sulfate and the calcium chloride came from Albany last Thursday, and the acids, catalytics, and instruments are due from Montreal any day now. The mills of the gods and all that. I'll do the work in Allen's cave near the lower woodlot, and at the same time we'll be openly making some wine in the cellar here. There ought to be some excuse for offering a new drink, though it won't take much planning to fool those moonstruck nincompoops. The trouble will be to make Rose take wine, for she pretends not to like it. Any experience that I make on animals will be down in the cave, and nobody ever thinks of going there in winter. I'll do some wood cutting to account for my time away. A small load or two brought in will keep him off the track. January 20th. It's harder than I thought. A lot depends on the exact proportions. The stuff came from Montreal, but I had to send again for some better scales and an acetylene lamp. They're getting curious down at the village. Wish the express office weren't in Stumwicky's store. Am trying various mixtures on the sparrows that drink and bathe in the pool in front of the cave when it's melted. Sometimes it kills them, but sometimes they fly away. Clearly I've missed some important reaction. I suppose Rose and the upstart are making the most of my absence, but I can afford to let them. There can be no doubt of my success in the end. February 11th. Have got it at last. Put a fresh lot in the little pool, which is well melted today, and the first bird that drank it toppled over as if he were shot. I picked him up a second later, and he was a perfect piece of stone, down to the smallest claws and feathers. Not a muscle changed since he was poised for drinking, so he must have died the instant any of the stuff got to his stomach. I didn't expect the petrification to come so soon, but a sparrow isn't a fair test of the way things would act in a large animal. I must get something bigger to try it on, for it must be the right strength when I give it to those swine. I guess Rose's dog's Rex will do. I'll take him along the next time and say a timberwolf got him. She thinks a lot of him, and I shan't be sorry to give her something to sniffle over before the big reckoning. I must be careful where I keep this book. Rose sometimes prowls around in the queerest places. February 15th. Getting warm. Tried it on Rex. It worked like a charm with only double the strength. I fixed the rock pool and got him to drink. He seemed to know something queer had hit him, for he bristled and growled, but he was a piece of stone before he could turn his head. The solution ought to have been stronger, for a human being ought to be very much stronger. I think I'm getting the hang of it now, and I'm about ready for that cur Wheeler. The stuff seems to be tasteless, but to make sure, I'll flavor it with the new wine I'm making up at the house. Wish I were sure about the tastelessness so I could give it to Rose and water without trying to urge wine on her. I'll get the two separately, Wheeler out here and Rose at home. Have just fixed a strong solution and cleared away all the strange objects in front of the cave. Rose whimpered like a puppy when I told her a wolf had gotten Rex, and Wheeler gurgled a lot of sympathy. March 1st. Wow, really? Praise the Lord Sagoth. Oh, no, sorry. Sagotha. I'll have to look that up later. I've got the son of hell. I got the son of hell at last. I told him I'd found a new ledge of friable limestone down this way, and he trotted after me like the yellow cur he is. I had the wine-flavored stuff in a bottle on my hip, and he was glad of a swig when we got here. Gulped it down without a wink and dropped in his tracks before he could count to 3. But he knows I've had my vengeance, for I made a face at him that he couldn't miss. I saw the look of understanding come onto his face as he keeled over. In 2 minutes, he was solid stone. I dragged him into the cave and put Rex's figure outside. That bristling dog shape will help scare people off. It's getting time for spring hunters, and besides, there's a damned lunger named Jackson in a cabin over the hill who does a lot of snooping around in the snow. I wouldn't want my laboratory and storeroom to be found just yet. When I got home, I told Rose that Wheeler had found a telegram at the village summoning him suddenly home. I don't know whether she believed me or not, but it doesn't matter. For form's sake, I packed Wheeler's things and took them down the hill, telling her I was going to ship them after him. I put them in the dry well at the abandoned Rampoline place. Now for Rose. March 3rd. I can't get Rose to drink any wine. I hope that stuff is tasteless enough to go unnoticed and watered. I tried it in coffee and tea, but it forms a precipitate and can't be used that way. If I use it in water, I'll have to cut down the dose and trust it to work more gradual action. Mr. and Mrs. Hoog dropped in this noon, and I had hard work keeping the conversation away from Wheeler's departure. It mustn't get around that we say he was called back to New York when everybody at the village knows no telegram came, and he didn't leave on the bus. Rose is acting damned queer about the whole thing. I'll have to pick a quarrel with her and keep her locked up in the attic. The best way is to try to make her drink that doctored wine. And if she does give in, so much the better. March 7th. I've started on Rose. She wouldn't drink the wine, so I took a whip to her and drove her up in the attic. She'll never come down alive. I passed her a platter of salty bread and salt meat and a pail of slightly doctored water twice a day. The salt food ought to make her drink a lot, and it can't be long before the action sets in. I don't like the way she shouts about Wheeler when I'm at the door. The rest of the time, she is absolutely silent. March 9th. It is damn peculiar how slow that stuff is getting hold of Rose. I'll have to make it stronger. Probably she'll never taste it with all the salt I've been feeding her. Well, if it doesn't get her, there are plenty of other ways to fall back on. But I would like to carry this neat statue plan through. Went to the cave this morning and all is well there. I sometimes hear Rose's steps on the ceiling overhead, and I think they're getting more and more dragging. The stuff is certainly working, but it's too slow, not strong enough. From now on, I'll rapidly stiffen up the dose. March 11th. It's very queer. She's still alive and moving. Tuesday night I heard her piggling with the window, so went up and gave her a raw hiding. She acts more sullen than frightened, and her eyes look swollen. But she could never drop to the ground from this height, and there's nowhere she could climb down. I have had dreams at night, for her slow, dragging place on the floor above gets on my nerves. Sometimes I think she works on the lock on the door. March 15th. Still alive despite all the strengthening of the dose. There's something queer about it. She crawls now and doesn't pace very often, but the sound of her crawling is horrible. She rattles the windows too and fumbles with the door. I shall have to try to finish her off with the rawhide if this keeps up. I'm getting very sleepy. Wonder if Rose has got on her guard somehow. She must be drinking the stuff. The sleepiness is abnormal. I think the strain is telling on me. I'm sleepy. Here, the cramped handwriting trails out in a vague scrawl, giving place to a note in firmer, evidently feminine handwriting, indicative of great emotional temperature. Tension. Temperature. March 16th, 4 a.m. This is added by Rose C. Morris, about to die. Please notify my father, Osborne E. Chandler, Route 2, Mountaintop, New York. I have just read what the beast has written. I felt sure he had killed Wheeler, but did not know how until I read this terrible notebook. Now I know what I escaped. I noticed the water tasted queer, so I took none of it after the first sip. I threw it all out the window. That one sip has half paralyzed me, but I can still get about. The thirst was terrible, but I ate as little as possible of the salty food and was able to get a little water by setting some old pans and dishes that were up here under places where the roof leaked. There were 2 great rains. I thought he was trying to poison me, though I didn't know what the poison was like. He had written about himself and me. What he has written about himself and me is a lie. We were never happy together, and I think I married him only under one of those spells that he was able to lay on people. I guess he hypnotized both my father and me, for he was always hated and feared and suspected of dark things with the devil. My father once called him the devil's kin, and he was right. No one will ever know what I went through as his wife. It was not simply common cruelty, though God knows he was cruel enough. He beat me often with a leather whip. It was more than anyone this age can ever understand. He was a monstrous creature and practiced all sorts of hellish ceremonies handed down by his mother's people. He tried to make me help in the rites, and I don't dare even hint what they were. I would not, so he beat me. It would be blasphemy to tell what he tried to make me do. I can say he was a murderer even then, for I know what he sacrificed one night on Thunder Hill. He was surely the devil's kin. I tried 4 times to run away, but he caught me and beat me. Also, he had sort of a hold over my mind, and even over my father's mind. About Arthur Wheeler, I have nothing to be ashamed of. We did come to love one another, but only in an honorable way. He gave me the first kind treatment I had ever had since leaving my father's, and meant to help me get out of the clutches of that fiend. He had several talks with my father, and was going to help me get out west. After my divorce, we would have been married. Ever since that brute locked me in the attic, I have planned to get out and finish him. I always kept the poison overnight in case I could escape and find him asleep and give it to him somehow. At first, he waked easily when I worked on the lock of the door and tested the condition of the windows. But later, he began to get more and more tired and sleep sounder. I could always tell by his snoring when he was asleep. Tonight, he was so fast asleep, I forced the lock without waking him. It was hard work getting downstairs with my partial paralysis, but I did. I found him here with the lamp burning, asleep at the table where he'd been writing in this book. In the corner was the long rawhide whip he had so often beaten me with. I used it to tie him to the chair so he could not move a muscle. I lashed his neck so that I could pour anything down his throat without his resisting. He waked up just as I was finishing, and I guess he saw right off that he was done for. He shouted frightful things and tried to chant mystical formulas, but I choked him off with a dish towel from the sink. Then I saw this book, and he had been writing in, and stopped to read it. The shock was terrible. I almost fainted 4 or 5 times. My mind was not ready for such things. And after that, I talked to that fiend for 2 or 3 hours steady. I told him everything I had wanted to tell him through all the years I had been his slave, and a lot of other things that had to do with what I had read in that awful book. He looked almost purple when I was through, and I think he was half delirious. Then I got a funnel from the cupboard and jammed it in his mouth, taking out the gag. He knew what I was going to do, but he was helpless. I brought down the pail of poisoned water and without a qualm, I poured a good half of it into the funnel. Must have been a very strong dose, for almost at once I saw that brute begin to stiffen and turn a dull, stony gray. In 10 minutes, I knew he was solid stone. I could not bear to touch him, but the tin funnel clinked horribly when I pulled it out of his mouth. I wish I could have given that kin of the devil a more painful, lingering death, but surely this was the most appropriate he could have had. There's not much more to say. I am half paralyzed, and with Arthur murdered, I have nothing to live for. I shall make things complete by drinking the rest of the poison after placing this book where it will be found. In a quarter of an hour, I shall be a stone statue. My only wish is to be buried beside the statue that was Arthur, and when it is found in the cave where the fiend left it. Poor trusting Rex ought to lie at our feet. I do not care what becomes of the stone devil tied in the chair. It's a good story. Whew. All right, guys. You have any thoughts? Any opinions? Any weakness? Personally, I'm a little headachy, I'm going to be honest. Yes, it did end happy. It was a very happy ending. Happier ending than most of those types of stories, you know? Revenge. Right? It was a good ending. The guy got what was coming to him. I really enjoy these Lovecraft stories. They've got good twists to them. Whew. All right, guys. Just a reminder, I am still working towards that 3K watch hours. So if you want to watch this again or watch any of the others, crap, I forgot to add this to a playlist. I'll fix that in a minute. Please do so. Just put it on when you're not listening. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I need to get better at saying that kind of stuff, like during the stream and shit. But one thing at a time right now. Yeah, I think I will put in the community tab a poll about Christmas stories. So watch out for that. So you can voice your opinion and I can do some research because really the only ones I know are, I don't know that I could do a Christmas Carol. Actually, no, I don't think that one's too long. I might be able to do a Christmas Carol. But 'Twas the Night Before Christmas too. I know that one. There's got to be some more out there. So maybe I'll look for some Christmas horror stories, huh? That might be fun. Anyway, I appreciate you all so much for being here. I'm going to go cut up some meat for dinner tomorrow night. Then I'm going to bed. But until then, y'all take good care of yourselves. Have a very good evening. And you know what? I'll catch you later. Sweet dreams.